Welcome to the Chinese Canadian Museum's podcast, The School Room. I'm your host, Melissa Lee, CEO of the museum. Thank you for joining us. On last month's episode, we highlighted the story of Chen Hongchen, the first Chinese Canadian Olympian who competed in the 1968 Games as a weightlifter. However, it actually wasn't until 16 years later that a Chinese Canadian, Fung, would win an Olympic gold medal. Lori competed in rhythmic gymnastics at the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, which is also the year rhythmic gymnastics was introduced as an Olympic sport. Lori's win in 1984 was doubly historic as it made her the first gold medalist in rhythmic gymnastics history and the first Chinese Canadian gold medalist. Today, we're so thrilled to have Lori Fung on our podcast. Welcome, Lori, to the schoolroom.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
This is such a personal pleasure as well, just because when I watch Olympics, which I'm doing now, the gymnastics is the one that I watch the most. So it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background in gymnastics?
Well, mine is not a typical story. I wasn't a child that grew up in a sports family where at age 3 and 4, I was doing all sorts of sports. I grew up in East Vancouver, and I basically just went to school and rode my bike outside and played, and I didn't do any organized activities. And it wasn't until 1972 when I was, I guess I was 9 years old, and I saw on television the Olympics, and I saw the gymnastics event with Olga Korbut. Amazing. She was from Russia. She won the gold medal in gymnastics. And that's when I first saw Olympics and first saw gymnastics. And I remember watching it in awe. And I was like thinking to myself, oh, wow, that's amazing and something I would love to do. But it was just a little bit of a pipe dream. I kind of tucked it away. And then 4 years later, my dream was renewed when I saw Nadia Comaneci. And I remember thinking to myself, well, this is sort of a silly pipe dream for a kid from East Vancouver because I was just a normal kid that didn't do any organized sports. So I remember thinking to myself, I guess you have to be Romanian or Russian or something like that in order to go to the Olympics and win a gold medal. But that same Olympics, my sister called us into the living room while watching the athletics. And she was freaking out because there was a boy from her high school in East Vancouver, Vancouver Tech, named Greg Joy, who was jumping in high jump for a medal. And he ended up winning a silver medal for Canada. And it was at that moment that I thought to myself, hey, you don't have to be Russian. You don't have to be Romanian. You can be a kid from East Vancouver and go to the Olympics. So that was it. At that moment, I said to myself, I want to go to the Olympics. Now, there was one other problem. I wasn't in any sports. So I don't know how that was going to work. But I joined my gymnastics club at school. It was once a week for 45 minutes after school. And I felt like that was my start to wanting to do gymnastics. And I loved it so much. And that love was noticed by my school teacher. And she contacted my parents and said, you know, Lori loves gymnastics. She loves dance. And I've heard about this new sport called rhythmic gymnastics. And there's a club in Vancouver. And maybe you want to get her involved. So my parents did that. And I started once a week in recreational gymnastics. So in my mind, I was like well on my way to training for the Olympics because I was training twice a week, once after school for 45 minutes at school, and, once a week in a recreational rhythmic gymnastics program.
Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between gymnastics and rhythmic gymnastics?
Yes. So regular gymnastics is called artistic gymnastics.
Right.
And that's done on apparatus, on the floor, on the balance beam, on the parallel bars, and on the vault. And that's the kind of gymnastics I was introduced to at my school because there's rhythmic gymnastics was relatively unknown. But rhythmic gymnastics is more dance related, all done on the floor area. And it's done with hand apparatus like ribbons, balls, hoops, clubs, and skipping ropes. And that was really wonderful for me because that's what I love to do. I love to do the dancing. So that was where I did my rhythmic gymnastics training. I just became somewhat addicted to it. And I just wanted to do it every day, all day, and never stop. And my coach noticed it. So she put me into a little higher level and a first competitive competition. And you have to understand at this point, I was 12 or 13 years old, which is really quite late to start a sport. But I sort of fast tracked it by loving it so much and doing it every waking moment. I was thinking gymnastics, breathing gymnastics, doing gymnastics as much as I could. I went to high school and I remember taking my apparatus to school every day and leaving my hoop in the counselor's office so that at lunchtime I could race down and pick up my hoop and race to the gym and ask the volleyball or the basketball intramurals that was going on if I could just stand on the side and practice my throws because I just loved the sport so much. It all progressed and it just kept progressing, but rhythmic gymnastics was not even a hint yet to be in the Olympics. But I was telling everybody I'm going to go to the Olympics in rhythmic gymnastics. And I think it worried my parents a bit because they were like, when are we going to tell her that her sport isn't in the Olympics? But it didn't matter because then in 1980, the Olympics was being held in Moscow, and unfortunately, Canada and many countries boycott.
Right.
And there was rhythmic gymnastics for the first time was being introduced by the Russian Federation as a demonstration sport. And that's how it usually progresses. You start one year at the Olympics as a demonstration sport with no medals, and then you move the following year, it gets voted as to whether the sport will become a full medal sport. So everything was on track, and it felt like all the stars were aligned for me because by 1980, I was well on my way to being in the top in Canada.
Wow. And how old were you then?
Oh, 1980, I would have been 17. And so I was well on my way to being top in Canada. And by 1982, I did win the national championships for the first time. So at that point, there was a lot of murmurs and rumors that rhythmics was going to be completely a full medal sport in 1984. So all the things that I was saying to everybody as a young child before rhythmics was in the Olympics was coming true. And by 1984, I was still the Canadian champion, and rhythmic gymnastics was a full medal sport. And I got the okay from the Canadian Olympic Association to be on the Canadian team. And it was just a dream come true to go to the Olympics.
So we were also reading that you found out you were going to the Olympics just a month before the games.
That's right.
Can you tell us that story?
Even though I was Canadian champion, there were some rules within the Canadian Olympic Association that they wouldn't send athletes unless they could be in the top 16 in the sport. But at the previous World Championships, I was only ranked 25th. So in order for me to get the blessing of the Canadian Olympic Association to compete for Canada, I had to travel to many international competitions and compete against some top athletes in the world that were in the top 16 and place higher than them. So I was on the chase that year before, traveling to many international competitions. I went to Poland, I went to France, I went to Bulgaria, and I was really chasing that dream of showing the Canadian Olympic Association that I had improved since the previous Worlds and that I was worthy of that position. So it was kind of a little bit of nail biting because I was beating girls that were in the top 16. And so, until you get that word that you're going and you're named to the team, it's never solidified. And so it was quite late. because our Olympics started in late July, and I believe our nationals was in June. I won the championships, and then we were just on a waiting game. And when I got the word that, yes, I could go to the Olympics, it was just like all the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place.
Your parents during this time, how involved were they? Because, nowadays you see parents that are kind of almost semi second coaches, how they
Yeah.
organize the schedule for their kids. What was it like back then? And how did your parents support you?
My parents supported me in the best possible way they could. They just supported what I wanted to do. They were not second coaches. They did not organize my schedule. I did all of that. If anything, I was begging them, oh, please, can I go to the gym more? Mom, I need to go to Bulgaria to train. Mom, I need to go to Romania to train. Mom and Dad, I need to do this. And they were just like 100% behind me in anything that I did. I left school at the end of grade 11, and I promised them that I would do correspondence so I could train more hours and not have to waste my day at school. You can imagine.
Wow.
And they were very much in a little bit of a quandary to let me do that. And I remember they came to the school, my high school, to meet with my counselors and my teachers. And all my counselors and teachers just said to my parents, you don't know, your daughter has a special something and wants to do this so badly that we don't think that keeping her in a classroom is going to help. It's going to be, her mind is not there. She's going to learn so much more traveling the world and competing in her sport. And so I remember my parents came out of that meeting saying, I can't believe we're letting our child finish in grade 11. But I promised them that I would do correspondence, which is school by mail, because back then there was no internet. And so I was traveling all over the world to chase these competitions and do all of that. And that's how they supported me. And they supported me, obviously, financially, to make sure that I had all of this, because there was no funding back then. And so I was traveling basically all over the world to gain as much experience, training, competitions as I could so that I could be the best that I could be at the Olympics.
Let's talk a little bit more about your family history. So, we understand you're of mixed Chinese and Japanese heritage. Do you know much about your family's migration story?
Well, both my parents were born here in Canada. My father was born here in Vancouver. My mother was born in Salmon Arm, BC. So I'm second generation Canadian. I know after the Olympics, I found a little bit more history about the Yin Ping Society, and that was sort of where my family name comes from. And I did receive a beautiful gift from the village from China where my name, the Fung name, came from. And I have it very proudly on my wall over my desk right now. And it's a beautiful silk embroidery. And it is, they told me, it says in Chinese, because I don't read Chinese or Japanese. It says that it's Lori Fung, Grace of 100 Birds, and there are 100 birds in silk that have been embroidered onto this beautiful piece. And my parents had it wonderfully framed, and it's such a special piece for me.
Have you been to your family's village?
I have not. I have been to China and I've been to Japan, but I have not been to the village. I don't know if I have any relatives there. My grandfather was here in Canada, and so I don't have a lot of history with family or relatives back in China or Japan.
And when you were competing in gymnastics at that time in the Olympics, were there many Asians? And what did it mean to be Asian or Asian Canadian at the time? Did you think about it?
I didn't think about it. I never saw myself as being different. I went, like I said, I trained all over the world, and people would look at me and were like very interested in me because, in some of the countries, like in Bulgaria and Romania, they didn't see that many Asian athletes. Now, China did come to that Olympics in rhythmic gymnastics. I believe they had just gotten involved in the sport a few years earlier. So there was China there. And, but I didn't really feel any different. I know people would often say, wow, look at, she's so beautiful. She's Asian. And they would always say, like in some of the Eastern European countries, they were very in awe of my skin color, my hair color. And I always thought they were in awe of my performance because I just love
Of
to perform. But I'm told now because I have many friends from Bulgaria and from Russia, and they would say, "We remember you when you first came to Bulgaria, and we were in the audience and we saw you." And they would say things like, "We were all like in awe of this Asian girl from Canada." Just didn't make sense to them.
course. I know that you've performed for some pretty famous people during your lifetime, including Elton John, Princess Diana, Prince Charles, who is, of course, now King Charles. What's the most memorable performance you've given?
I also did a ball routine during the papal visit in Vancouver for the Pope.
Wow.
That one was one of the scariest to have 100,000 people in BC Place Stadium. It was just unbelievable. I actually didn't get to perform for Elton John. I was a special guest of his at his concert because he had received a gold album. So I have a picture prominently displayed in my office of myself and Elton John. He's wearing my gold medal.
Wow.
And of course, performing for Princess Diana and now King Charles was also special at Expo. And I performed in front of Princess Grace of Monaco at a competition in the early 80s. And so all of those things hold a special place in my heart.
And you also had an appearance in Catwoman, the movie,
Yeah.
2004, as an aerial ballerina.
Oh, yes, that was much later. I actually was trying to audition some gymnasts that I was coaching for the part because it was through a person that I knew who helped me prepare for the Olympics. She was a choreographer, and she then became the top choreographer for Cirque du Soleil. So she called me one day and she said, "Lori, I'm casting for some places for aerial ballerinas for Catwoman, and I need some gymnasts." So I was sending gymnasts to these auditions, and they none of them were the right fit because they had to be certain age, they had to be certain height, they had to have so much experience. And so then we couldn't find anybody in my gym club. And then the choreographer called me and she said, "Well, Lori, what about you?" And I said to her, I said, "Deb," I said, "I'm a mom." Like, I don't do that anymore. She goes, "Well, are you still in good shape?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm in pretty good shape, but I'm a mom. I just don't do that." She says, "Well, come down and let's just have you try out for the part." So I went down there. I'd never done aerial work before. They strapped me into this harness and they swung me around and they said, "Try to think of yourself as doing a rhythmic routine in the air." And I did all of this and I felt completely air sick because it makes you spin. And when I finished, I was completely nauseous. And then I left there feeling like, oh, what a horrible experience. And they called me the next day. They said, "You were great. We loved the audition and you've got the part."
Wow.
So I said, "Oh my goodness, like this is incredible." And so I got a part to be in the movie, and I have credits at the end of the movie as well as a dancer. And it was an amazing experience to meet Halle Berry and to be in that whole realm of movie. It was wonderful, and it's so great now because I still get residual checks every year.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love that story how you did it and you did it when you were a mom. And it kind
Yeah,
of is fitting because I think Halle Berry is also a mom as well. So moms can still do anything.
that would be 20 years ago when the
Right,
movie.
right.
Yeah, but it was really, that was a big highlight too.
So, our last question, and it's a question I think that many people have asked you. How did it feel like that moment when you knew that you won the gold medal?
It really didn't sink in. I wasn't expected to win. I knew I had a good chance at getting a medal, but I just did each of my routines in the finals. And at the end of each routine, I was just thinking to myself if I was pleased or proud of the performance that I did and that I just nailed a routine. I wasn't looking at scores. And I remember after my last routine, I was just so proud of my accomplishment at the Olympics, not about the placing, but just of my accomplishment. I finished, I went to the dressing room to pack up my stuff, feeling very satisfied at how I did at the Olympics, but didn't know my result. And it was a friend of mine from the American team. She came barging into the dressing room, screaming at the top of her lungs, saying, Lori, you did it, you did it, you did it. And I'm like looking at her going, I did what? And I'm thinking to myself, I got a medal, I got a bronze medal maybe, or because going into the finals, I was sitting in bronze medal position. And she goes, no, you won the whole freaking thing.
Oh
And
my goodness.
I went out into the arena. I had security guards on me. I had interview cameras in my face. I was just standing there in complete shock, not knowing, what had happened. And I didn't know if my parents and my sister, who had come down to watch the Olympics, were actually there because they bought tickets for the preliminary round and they didn't buy tickets for the final. And I found out the day before that they were going to try to get tickets to the finals by getting scalp tickets. And so I really didn't know if my parents had made it in because there's no texting, there's no cell phones. I really didn't know. So it was just all a big blur of emotion. And it wasn't until I was standing on the medal podium and I was watching the Canadian flag rise up, singing "O Canada." And as the flag rose up, just under the flag, I could see my mom and my sister sitting there. They were both in tears, of course, and it was amazing. But I didn't know where my dad was because he had to get a different ticket. He was up in the nosebleed section somewhere because they had to stand outside Poly Pavilion with a sign that said, "Parents of gymnasts need tickets."
Oh no.
Because they didn't know that I was going to make the finals. They came and watched me in the preliminary because that's for sure I was going to do. And then I made the finals. So they were in a scramble to try to, get tickets.
And so that feeling when you heard the national anthem and you saw your mom and your sister right under the flag, I mean, how emotional did you feel?
I was really emotional. I was emotional for two reasons. I was emotional just because it's just an overwhelming feeling being at the Olympics, then competing at the Olympics, then finding out you won the Olympics. But I was still numb. But I was also emotional because the girl who was in silver position was the favorite to win. And she was a friend that I had gone and trained in Romania with. And as I'm standing on the podium, receiving my gold medal, she was on the silver podium crying her eyes out because it was a very big, devastating moment for her. And so I felt elated and sad for her. And then I felt, it just was a whole mix of emotions that you can't even imagine.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience, and especially at such an apt time. I want to ask, are you watching the Olympics right
Oh,
now?
yes. I think this is part of the reason why I got sick because I'm not getting very much sleep. I love watching so many sports and actually, not just I love watching gymnastics, but I love watching so many sports because I had the honor of being on the CBC commentating team in 2008 for Beijing Olympics. And so I went there and I got to experience the Olympics in a different way and see many other sports. And that was a big highlight for me because for me at the 84 Olympics, the focus was so, I was completely focused on just competing. And I maybe didn't get the full experience of the Olympics. And our sport was on the last day. So I remember going to the closing ceremonies and then flying home afterwards. And so it was just, like I said, it was a whirlwind of emotions.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming on our show today, Lori. And
I
we
really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
thank you. This podcast was recorded on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We invite you all to reflect on the territories that you're on and the host nations. To learn more about the Chinese Canadian Museum and book tickets, visit us at ChineseCanadianMuseum.ca and follow us on Instagram at CCMuseumBC for updates. The School Room is presented by the Chinese Canadian Museum, hosted by Dr. Melissa Carmen Lee, and produced by Rosalie Gonawan. Production is supported by Noah Taylor and the Walrus Lab. The theme music and original audio was created by Joshua Young, and graphic design is by Studio Pian Pian He and Max Harvey. Stay tuned for next month's episode of The School Room, available wherever you get your podcasts.